Hi.
Hey, how's
Nice
it
to meet
going?
Nice to meet you. This is so
Yeah,
funny.
likewise.
So you've never done one of these before, right? Yeah.
No, I'm mildly terrified, but it's fine.
Yeah. It's funny because it feels so like intimate and personal, but
Yes.
there's other people listening. So hi to those friends. Um, so I guess should we get started or introduce ourselves?
Yeah, sounds good.
My name is Victoria Manganiello. I'm an artist based in Brooklyn. Um, and was looking forward to, still am looking forward to having a show with art in buildings opening as soon as it's safe to do so.
And I'm Amanda Martinez. I'm also based in Brooklyn and Bushwick. And yeah, Victoria and I were set to show together at 125 Main Lane. But with everything going on, it's been postponed. So Victoria had the good idea of having us chat to get to know each other. So
Yeah, this is our first time, although we've been following on Instagram
yeah,
each other's work, but it's our first time meeting each other. So we've prepared some questions for each other ahead of time, and we were just going to do a back and forth, one question each, and who knows, maybe it'll just become a conversation.
sure.
Should I start or do you want to start?
Either way. How about I start?
Okay, go for it.
Um, so my first question for you, it's pretty basic, but how did you come to work in textiles specifically?
I have always been interested in soft materials. So ever since I was a kid, I was like the queen of friendship bracelets, and I wasn't that into sports, but I was often like on the sidelines playing, doing knitting, or I taught
Mm.
myself how to sew when I was a kid. It wasn't something that was happening in my family or at home, but I've thought about this a lot, and there must have been some kind of inspiration, maybe from the parent of a friend or
Mhm.
something I saw in the media, but um, it wasn't until I went to college and took simultaneously a textiles practical class, like intro to textiles, and then also a class in the history of Native American art, that it started to occur to me sort of what was possible in this modern time with textile.
Mm.
So both from this making point of view, that we could create something that wasn't only functional, but that could be conceptual and artful, but also the history of these materials and how much is invested in that story. So with regards to the Native Americans in particular, I remember being so fascinated by how that culture needed to adapt its traditions to sort of resist the colonialism that was happening,
Mhm.
and how the
Sure.
textiles became a sort of symbol of colonialism. And we look at those objects as functional and beautiful, but they're also, full of story and place. So
Awesome.
I work with other materials sometimes, but
Mhm. Yeah,
I
I
just
noticed
find,
you also incorporate like framing devices and things from time to time.
yeah, that's more recently.
Mhm.
But I just feel, I don't know, I'm just drawn to those materials, and who knows, maybe in the future I'll leave them and move on. But I just love, I feel like it's an endless realm of story and meaning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome.
And I was actually curious that our questions are aligning, about your materials and your work too, because you seem to work with materials in such an intentional way. Like your pieces are, when I look at them, the materiality is one of the first things I start considering. So I'd love to know how you come to work with the materials that you do, and also what kinds of tools that you use to manipulate them.
Sure. So I'd probably say the earliest kind of starting point, as far as being drawn to those materials is my sister is a dancer, and one of my earliest like art classes was with someone who was the head property master for that ballet. So I saw him using this material in a way it's often used outside of construction, which is in prop making. And I just kind of fell in love with that idea that things could appear one way, and then change based on your perception of them, your relative relationship to them. Yeah, I really kind of latched onto that idea. And I think from there, it sort of just became that they're really ubiquitous. They're everywhere. You see them on job sites, you see this stuff in the street. Um, and I did kind of like that it doesn't have this like, it's a relatively new-ish material, because it's man-made, it's synthetic. So I just kind of like that it was outside of the traditional conversation of sculpture. But with that being said, it is, it's becoming more and more commonplace, um, in use as an artistic material. Um, but yeah, I would say first and foremost, I just like the idea that it's easy to manipulate. You can A lot of trickery, visual trickery can kind of happen. You can manipulate it to look like other materials, or take on other qualities such as like appearing like stone or wood, depending on what you do with it. And kind of along those same lines, I would say I like I liked using tools for wood or metalworking with this material, and just kind of, I feel like it allowed me a lot of freedom, just kind of working with it on and off over the years, in that I could use things in a way that might not be their original intention, and just kind of take a lot of joy in that. And then also like making my own tools, or finding a tool that's intended for some other purpose, but like it might work for what I need. It's a little like, I don't know, a kind of a DIY attitude, but yeah.
Yeah, I loved seeing the photos of the pieces that almost looked like they were soft and furry. Um,
Yeah,
and then then the next image is of something that looks like it could be metal or wood or something, and it really made me think about what material can be. And especially in this world, where in this time where we're kind of changing things so quickly based on the needs that we have, it's interesting
sure.
to see how you put
Yeah,
that material.
yeah, definitely. And like I said, you can find this stuff around, like I do source from lumber yards sometimes, but it's also just, it's everywhere, So, um, okay. Next question I had for you, just kind of going through your website and your social media, I saw that you taught as adjunct at both Parsons and NYU. Um, I feel like the ages of 18 to 22 were pretty impressionable years, just speaking for myself. So I was just curious about how fostering student work, if it affects your own at all.
Yeah, it's such a privilege to know people at that time and to be able to be a small part of guiding them,
Mm,
towards their next steps. I was certainly at that time in my life really open to new ideas, and I see that in my students too. It's I love teaching because it feels like I get to be a student. Like I remember finishing
yeah.
school and thinking, how do I stay here forever? Like just the idea of community and inspiration and opportunity, the sense of opportunity, was something I loved while I was a student, and being a teacher offers me a lot of that, or some, version of it.
Hmm.
Um, I think there's so much wisdom in, I say young people, but I'm not that much older than my students, but I learn so much from them. So it's
Sure.
really it's really great to be in the same space. And the students at both of those programs are so talented and thoughtful and curious. And it's certainly a privilege. We just spent the second half of this past semester online, which was a weird
Yeah,
experience.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
And I also just got so much, like in our final crits last week, I was brought to tears a number of times, just so moved by how hard these students have worked and how
Oh,
dedicated
wow.
they are.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was surprised, which I almost regret in a way that um, but yeah, they just blew me away, and it's such a privilege to work with them. And universities are, I think it's like a strange part of the art world. The
Mm,
value of an MFA or a BFA is kind of strange.
yeah.
But being in a university certainly offers so much to an artist who's looking for guidance or community or access. I tend in my teaching style to I focus more on like using technical skills for conceptual purposes.
Hmm.
And I think the two universities where I teach, NYU and Parsons, kind of take that in two different directions. So it's also great for me to exercise my teaching muscles in these two very different contexts. And that, differentiation also helps me clarify how I want to exist in the world as an artist.
Sure. Yeah, I was going to ask, I was curious how things were teaching online this as of late.
Yeah, I wonder if there are any other like online teachers in the chat now. Yeah, it's especially for hands-on making. I
Hmm.
think all students and teachers, had a hard time, of course,
Of course.
but a different set of challenges when you have to transition to online teaching when what you're teaching is so much centered on the space. So like I was teaching complex weaving structures on very unique, expensive tools to MFA students. And it didn't really make sense for me to ask those students to like make a hand loom out of your window. It's
Sure.
not,
Yeah.
that's not really what they signed up for. So
Yeah.
instead we transitioned and I let students guide themselves. And we did a lot of discussions and readings and self-guided work. But I don't know what next semester will bring. Hopefully we'll learn soon. I'm eager
Wow.
to know.
Yeah, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, and the online exhibitions for the final, final deliverables, especially graduating students who would have had an in-person
Hmm.
exhibition, and they had to do it online. I guess in a way, it's an interesting precedent for everybody. And
Sure.
a lot of the student work was thinking about what's going on in this time. So they did reflect and do some really important work in terms of documenting what the human experience has been.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Um, so my next question for you is also about location. I noticed that you've had the opportunity to show your work in a lot of unique spaces, like looking through your website and Instagram. It's not so often, it was less often that I saw a white wall gallery than I saw maybe like a home space or an industrial space. I know you showed your work at the UN, which is so cool. And you've traveled around the world, and now art in buildings, which is also this unconventional space. So I'm curious to know how space and location kind of influences your work, and if you could show your work anywhere in the universe, if you had like an ideal place, a location for your work, what would that be?
Oh, hmm. Yeah, I would say like the space you were talking about at the UN was as part of spring break last year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So that was the context for that. And then, yeah, the experience I had showing at the Triennale in Japan was really amazing for a lot of different reasons. But I think for me, mostly, it was so rewarding and interesting to have a completely different audience than I would typically have, um, in addition to, the space itself. Um, but maybe the reason I've shown in a lot of sort of non-traditional spaces is just the nature of the work I make. And sculpture in general, I think you kind of have to be a little bit resourceful and, open to that if you want to make large work. So, especially in New York, like some gallery spaces are
Mm-hmm.
extremely small. So, yeah, it just kind of depends on what opportunities present themselves. But as far as like a dream location for my work, I would say ideally like a building that the architecture of the building actively speaks to my work and vice versa. Or just something unusual. Like I was looking at this architect because I do draw a lot from that. I'm not sure how you pronounce his last name, but it's Konstantin Brodsky. And he designed these buildings with like crazy portals that completely cover the whole facade. So it's like each window is a framing device. And I feel like it just completely changes the way you interact with the space, which a lot of sculpture does as well. So I just think something like that that's like really intentional back and forth dialogue between the work and the space would be ideal, of course. But I mean, I also wouldn't be opposed to like, I don't know, something really weird, like a show in the middle of the high desert or something, you know? So,
I think you
yeah.
could probably make that happen.
Oh, yeah. I would like to try. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I love how your work is architectural. Like from so many so many points of view in a material sense, but also it feels like this abstraction of
Mm.
like it could be a blueprint of something in like the most deconstructed way.
Yeah. That's definitely a strong influence for me. And I think I think it affects the way I construct things also. Yeah. Okay. Forgive me while I
Yeah.
scroll.
Hmm.
Okay, the next question I had for you, I really love the wide range of approaches you're able to bounce between in your work. Just on first glance, it seems like mostly weaving and dyeing. And in particular, the way you shift textiles to the floor in the case of the more sculptural works. How did you arrive at this way of working?
I think I'm a very intuitive maker. So a lot of these choices that, might seem from the outside like a big shift have come about really slowly
Mm,
in the studio. So,
sure.
and probably this happens for you too. Like I'm just, a lot of times I'm kind of just like in the zone doing something. And like, for example, I have these pieces, yeah, that I've been making these standing frames for, which are the textiles that are within them are pretty transparent. So when you walk around, it plays with the space and the light. And I
Mm,
actually kind of came across that by accident because I had already made the frames, but I hadn't decided they'd go on the floor in a more sculptural way. And I just kind of balanced it on the floor for a second so I could move something.
that's
But
how it happens.
yeah, and then I was like, oh, that
Yeah,
goes there. I didn't
yeah,
know. But
that's cool.
they like tell you that happens to me so often where I'm moving stuff around in my crowded studio and then I
Hmm.
discover that like, oh, that's what it was supposed to do. But I rarely work from concept first. Like I'm usually just interested in making something and enjoying that process and letting it become a meditation, and then the form and material kind of offer themselves to me. In my living space, I'm pretty minimalistic, or at least I strive to be. But in my studio, I hoard a lot of stuff and collect a lot of, in New York City is the best place for garbage.
Oh
There's
yeah, it's
the
the best
best
track.
stuff. The best
Yeah,
trash. I've found some really good stuff on the street. So
it's really
also, I
hard to
think that,
resist right now, also.
yeah,
But
there's especially good garbage right now.
yeah,
I think
no,
people are like Marie Kondoing our
yeah, mm,
yeah, so sometimes I'll find something, or maybe it's gifted to me or whatever, and it just lives in the studio forever. And just by proximity, it inspires a shape or it becomes a part of the piece itself. Um, I am working in the last few years with technology in a new way and sort of
mm,
a material change also.
sure. Um, just along that, do you mind if I go ahead and ask you a follow-up question?
Yeah, go ahead. I'm actually
Um,
gonna, as we talk, my phone just told me it's gonna die, so I'm gonna walk and talk
oh,
into
sure.
a charger, but I'm listening to you.
Yeah, just along the lines of technology, I was curious if you could talk a little bit more about that, the role of or lack of technology in your work.
Yeah.
Because I saw on your website you had this project called Computer 1.0 that I really
Mhm.
enjoyed. That, yeah, it seemed to be discussing using that as a metaphor to talk about our larger relationship with technology. Um, and just really quickly, that the original Jacquard loom, um, or just how it's utilized in textiles and what it means today.
Yeah,
If you could,
sorry, I cut you off.
sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that technology plays such an interesting role in our lives right now. I mean, especially in this exact moment. Just the fact
Mhm.
that we're meeting in this really strange way and getting
Yeah.
to know each other. Not just meeting, but like I'm like developing a fondness for you through this device.
Hmm.
It's so strange.
Yeah.
So that's always been something that's been of interest to me conceptually. And in parallel, I'm fascinated by the history of textiles and its relationship to the computer and technology, both from the story of the Jacquard loom, which you mentioned, which was the first automated task production tool that humans invented, to things like the Apollo mission. There were women who actually hand wove with conductive, basically thread, the
Right.
operating system. So it's just so, there's so many intersections throughout history. And when you go much farther back too, there's even more ancient devices that were technically computers. They
Mm.
just weren't digital or electronic. So I just love how those stories can interact. And the Computer 1.0 project is something that I've created in collaboration with the designer, Julian Goldman. So we have a lot of these interests in common. Before we started working together, he was also thinking about these things, but from more of a design background. So I guess it's been 3 years now since we started working on it. And we kind of both bring our different backgrounds. I don't have any official or technical background in electronics, but I'm learning now since working with Julian, which I appreciate. And it's certainly popping up in some of the projects I'm doing independent from my collaboration with him.
Cool. That's exciting. I love finding new stuff in ways you don't expect. Yeah.
Yeah, I think part of being an artist is like having a really long list of skills that you have like an intermediate or beginner
Oh, yeah.
status of. Yeah.
Just like grab bag of weird skills. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, do you need to know how to attach this thing to this thing? Sure. I've
Yeah.
done that a couple times. I'm certainly not an expert, but yeah,
Yeah.
it's really funny.
Okay, I'm going to go to my next question. So, who are some of your favorite artists? And also, how do you find out about new artists?
Um, okay, so I would say overall, just like some basic academic favorites would be, you know, Eva Hess, Agnes Martin, Carmen Herrera, Myron Stout. Um, I think a lot of artists, myself included, continue to find like a dialogue in step with a lot of things that they did or started during their lifetimes. But I also enjoy them because they kept journals and wrote a lot and like philosophized about life. And I just like getting to know an artist's work in that context. And just, I don't know, maybe it's being nosy, but I love like being able to get inside their brain a little bit through writing or something that they've left behind in that way. Um, but then as far as people among us, I don't know, like it would be friends whose work I'm constantly inspired by. There's a sculptor I've come to know, and it's also interesting, like coming to know people through the art world or through the internet, as we're doing now, and just all the different connections that can form and sort of fan out over time, you know. But yeah, I would say this sculptor I've gotten to know, Sarah Tortora in Philadelphia. Um, she kind of makes these constructed monuments that are made out of debris and just put together in this really poetic way. I also love Gulnara Adili. She she's Iranian American and she pulls from her father's written archive and deconstructs Persian poetry and in this really formal way just does a lot of really interesting different things, you know. Um, I don't know. I could keep naming names. Other friends, Derek Velasquez, he is based in Denver. He works with kind of taking on colonialist imagery and reinterpreting it, such as like architectural decoration. Uh, Anjali Rattad, she's a painter in Brooklyn. Rochelle Bussieres, she's works in sort of a photo. She makes like lumen prints, but they're really formal and minimal and beautiful. I don't really understand the process myself, but yeah, I don't know. there's some longtime friends I have from Kansas City. I went to school at KCAI, and we've known each other for 10 years now, and it's just been really nice to see each other's work grow and change over the years. And I would say, like most artists, 9 times out of 10, I've met people through those people, or um, like I said, the art world just kind of fans out once you get involved with one circle. There's like a million others. So, and of course, yeah, the internet is a great way to find work. But also, we're in New York, so I feel extremely lucky that you can find work that is new to you all the time. So, yeah.
Cool. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm. It's a little long-winded, but
I'm
I,
excited to like look back and write these names down and look them up.
yeah. Okay. Another question for you. So kind of along the lines of what I was talking about previously, with technology, I can see what looks like several different types of surface treatment on your weavings. How much of the color informs you choose to work with as a result of dyeing or some other direct surface alteration versus a man-made quality inherent in the material itself?
Yeah, so I really like making the materials that I work with. I'm a yarn spinner and a weaver and a dyer.
Mm.
So I really enjoy these monotonous tasks that take a long time. But I intentionally pair these like super handmade things with synthetic found things also. Whether that's like an actual material fabric that's already been woven by someone else, or a synthetic color application, or a synthetic yarn. And conceptually, I like doing that because I think it can help us take a closer look at what materials can be, and also what something that's natural can be and what something that's synthetic can be, and like setting up this binary as a way to look at other binaries. So I often try to sort of make it not so obvious. So I might use a material that looks extremely natural because it's got some like soft green color, and then I'll pair it with something that looks really synthetic. Maybe it's like a neon pink, but then if you read a little bit more about the work, then you discover that actually the softer green one is the synthetic one, and the neon uh, pink one is a natural one.
Some trickery going on.
Some trickery, yeah. And
Yeah.
I think it's like 9 times out of 10, maybe someone who sees the work doesn't realize that. But I'm hoping that there's some subliminal experience with this,
Mm-hmm.
because of course there's so much more between the extremes of that spectrum between natural and synthetic. And our world
Sure.
loves binaries,
Yeah.
man, woman, alien, national, all
Yeah.
these weird designations that have so
Us,
much meaning.
them. Yeah.
Yes, us, them, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Inside, outside, I guess is a new one now.
Yeah.
And I like the opportunity to kind of more examine more the nuances of those things. And textile is something that's so familiar to everybody because we all wear clothes every day. So you can, even if you're not an expert or anything close to that, we all each understand textile in a way we
Mm-hmm.
might not other materials. So I think that's a really good entry point to this discussion, where someone might actually be able to determine the quality of the material just because they've got this toolkit already inside them.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that we all have like a pre-existing relationship if you get dressed every day. It's as
Yeah.
simple as
Which
that.
I think every single human on the planet does.
Yeah.
And the things that we dress ourselves in are totally different.
Mm-hmm.
They have different symbols and purposes and meanings. But there's still that like initial, and in such an intimate way, like in our most intimate body parts, we're
Yeah.
touching style. And I find that a lot of people touch my work more than, like, I've been in group shows and I'll see people
Yeah.
touch my work and not touch the thing next to it.
Mm-hmm.
So while a part of me is like, please don't do that, another part of me kind of likes that someone feels comfortable enough, despite the fact that they've been trained, like when you're in a gallery or museum,
Yeah.
to not touch art, that they still feel this draw to it in a physical way.
Yeah. I know exactly what you mean. It's like you want people to be that excited by what you're doing, that they want to explore it physically, but you know.
But then if they explore it physically, maybe someone else in the future can't.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Okay, my next question. So I'm curious to know what are some of the questions that you get asked most often when someone's seeing your work, whether that's in a studio visit or at a show, and what are the kinds of questions that you wish people would ask more often?
I would say number one is always, like most sculpture, how is it made? Um, but which, I don't mind, because I think it's only natural to some degree. People also always ask, like, can I touch it?
Mhm.
Like we were just talking about. But um, I think that just comes with the territory of making something that is a part of your, like, physically occupies and shares space with you. Um, so, yeah, I think those are really natural questions to have. But something I kind of wish that people would maybe ask more or be less afraid to talk about is, on some level, I just want to know, like, how does it make you feel? You know?
Mhm.
Um, I think those are really like basic animal kind of responses to have, that they might not want to express. But I think they're really important, um, because I don't know. I don't think I can really ask the audience to like change their experience with my work, of course, but um, I'm just always really curious to know how how they're experiencing it emotionally or psychologically, in that kind of way.
Yeah,
So
I really agree with that. I'm always when people ask me what it's about, I always want to say like, well, it's only about whatever you see. Like
sure,
as
yeah.
a viewer, that you're the one who kind of completes the work by seeing
Hmm.
it. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, and people seem to be a bit intimidated or are afraid to be wrong, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. I think that might be part of the reason why they're not quick to share that sort of thing that does, your innate emotional response is really personal to you, and you don't want it to be perceived as wrong. However, I don't really think there's a wrong answer, and I would just be curious to know more of that. I don't know
Yeah,
if there's a way, to like circumvent the kind of like, I don't know, austere nature that work can be shown sometimes in order, to really get that from the viewer. But yeah,
yeah. I think part of the reason why I like working with abstraction is because it feels like there might be more space for people to put their own stories in.
totally.
I can see how simultaneously it will be even more intimidating because of like the art world having created, in some cases, a distance with that type of work. But
Yeah,
I like working with abstraction because there's not a language, so anyone can understand it in theory.
exactly. Yeah, I feel the same way. I think it's the most open sort of way of working, that you can allow all these different aspects of life to filter into the work, and you can come to it in this really neutral way. But yeah, the art world has created this, like, everyone knows the like minimalist machismo sort of, those figures, but that have maybe made it a little bit intimidating for some people. But
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Um, oh yeah, next question I had for you. I really loved on your website you had this documentary series called, or proposal for a documentary series called Woman Interwoven. Um, and it seemed to, each episode would kind of focus on one woman working in textiles and talk a little bit about their environment, where they're from, that sort of thing. Was, and then also like contextualized by experts in that field. Was that project realized? And could you maybe talk a little bit more about it?
Yeah, it's still very early stages, so it hasn't been realized yet, but it will. Is
Mm,
my That's my attitude at least at this point.
yeah,
Um,
I wasn't sure if it was like a recent project or.
It's yeah, still very early on. So it's the project started because I'm just so interested in the stories that are behind all these materials that we work with, and I've encountered over the years so many surprising stories. So, for example, there is a woman based in Bordeaux in France who is by hand knitting these synthetic silk kidney replacements,
Whoa.
like, and it's how cool is that? And that's
Yeah,
textile, but it's also
amazing.
science and it's also biology, and it's past and it's future all at the same time.
Mm.
And this is just one example of, of a story that I encountered that really surprised me. And I think most people, when they think of textiles, they think of their clothing or maybe a rug or a towel, but the idea that it could pop up in this other industry would surprise them. So this was my kind of initial thought, was I'd love to share these stories in a format that's maybe more accessible, because I usually encountered them in a more niche context. But I've never made a film before or worked on a
Mm.
film.
Yeah, it seems
um,
really terrifying to me.
yeah, and I do have a friend who helped me a lot. Kristen Kremers is her name in the
Hmm.
beginning of this. She's a filmmaker or a videographer, and in sort of like figuring out how this could be realized. And then I teamed up recently with a woman named Sarah Moshman, who's a director, and she has a documentary director, and she's worked on a lot of projects that tell these kind of more invisible stories of women. And so seemed like the perfect fit. And it's only recently that I teamed up with her, and we were actually planning on starting to do some filming in March. So
Oh,
it was like,
yeah.
I think March 20th was the
Oh
date.
man.
And then we called the whole team, and we were like, oh, well, we're going to have to delay it a week. And
Yeah, right.
everyone knows how that turned out.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm super excited about it. We're raising money to start filming this sort of pilot, or what they call a sizzle reel. And one of the
That's cool.
things that I have gotten from the experience is kind of realizing that being an artist I don't have to stay in the box that I've been in. Like, I can make a documentary film. And by the way, I hope it goes to Netflix or
Yeah.
whatever. Like, I want the whole world to see it, because I want everyone to know more about textiles, because again, like, we all know it in this personal way. And
Mhm.
I think this documentary can offer people not just these cool niche stories, but a new way to look at some of these bigger topics, like women's rights, or women in STEM, for the example that I gave about the doctor, about the biologist.
Mhm.
Um, and it could also tell us more about all these different places that women live in the same way that maybe Chef's Table is something that somebody would
Sure.
watch, like, before they're going on a vacation or something like that. So I think
Yeah.
it would be something that would be accepted on a larger stage, but has the roots in the creative thought of an artist. So I really hope it comes together. I know it'll come together. I feel really confident about it, and I've been building a lot of contacts and context. So I'm hoping that we don't have to wait too long. Of course, a travel documentary is probably a lot harder to do with the
Sure.
state of the world, and I certainly am not comfortable going out until it's safe. It's totally safe to do that.
Yeah.
I also think that now more than ever, people need inspiration, and they need a reminder that we're all human and we all have these individual stories to tell, and the world is big, but it's also small, because we share
Yeah.
so much. So I do think it's a good time for this kind of project. So hopefully, once the world kind of settles into this state, we can start to pick it back up again. But
Yeah.
in the meantime, I've still been doing a lot of research and writing about it.
That's awesome. I'm so excited to see that realize. Yeah, it seems like a really lovely, accessible way to reach a lot of people who, like you said, might not otherwise think that this is for them, or maybe they don't realize all the cross connections, like you were talking about, between science and research and textiles. So, yeah, I'm really excited to see that.
Thank you. I will let you know when it's
Yeah.
available. um, okay, so my next question. So I was very curious about the titles that you give your work,
Ooh.
especially because there's a lot of abstraction happening, and so the title certainly gives, as in any artwork, a clue to understanding it, but some of them were quite poetic. And I'm just curious about your titles, how you come to find them and use them and what they mean to you.
Sure. I'd say like ever since I started working really consistently abstractly would probably be like immediately following college and kind of never looking back. um, I'd say like initially then I kind of referenced like I had very early in my life I studied music and piano in particular, and so I was kind of referencing that structurally in how things are being composed, how their work was coming together. Um, so I began to reference that really directly in the titles. And I don't think it was unsuccessful, but I think it, after a while, just kind of felt like the work was too specific. You know, like I was just talking about this one thing, which is like musical structure and how that translates visually, which of course is still always in the background for me because that was kind of my first like whatever artistic aesthetic experience as a young person. But over the years, I think as my work has become, the work itself has become like maybe more distilled, but I think I've just like started opening up the titles and outside context more. Um, and yeah, now I often am just kind of looking for something open, maybe referencing the form, but often I'm kind of looking at something a little lyrical or poetic or um, maybe sometimes a little bit tongue in cheek, depending. But yeah, I would just like them to give a slight context, and I've allowed them to become a little bit more personal over time, I think, as the work itself has just like opened up. So yeah,
Cool.
be a little bit more vulnerable. I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting. And like the titles that I encountered, it makes sense to me to hear,
Hmm.
especially about the connection to music. And you mentioned your sister is a dancer or you are a choreographer. Yeah.
She was a dancer, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so that was just kind of always in the background, I think. Which is, I know it's unusual for a lot of people, but yeah, it just kind of formed my brain that way, I guess.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, okay. Uh, Kind of along the same lines as talking about the Woman Interwoven documentary. Um, do you think that working, and I think I've already kind of surmised the answer to this, but I'd like to hear you talk about it. Do you think that working as a woman in textiles is inherently political, or do you see all artists as inherently political?
I do see all art and artists as political,
Mm.
which I think, I mean, we could probably talk about for forever, but it's a
Yeah.
topic I to talk about. And I talk about a lot with my students, like
Mm.
what do you want to say? Because you're saying something. So, you know, be intentional with that or be aware of the dialogue that you're having. Um, I just to think about like a woman working in textile, it's been an interesting point for me to pay attention to throughout my career working this way. And I have in the past, and it's been tricky, and I don't think I would necessarily always do it this way again in the future, but been selective with the way I call myself a textile artist and
Sure.
or fiber artist, and there have certainly been contexts where I feel more comfortable just being artist.
Yeah.
And the reason I kind of hesitated or I mentioned that I'm not sure how I feel about that is because the last thing I want to do is separate myself from textiles and from textile artists. I love the history of that, and craft has always been relegated to the background of the art
Hmm.
world. And I love the opportunity to be a part of this larger movement towards giving it more attention. Um, and all of those who have been involved in it more attention, who have
Sure.
often been other folks that have been relegated to the background, like
Yeah.
women or people of color or indigenous people.
Hmm.
They've just, you know, always been given less attention on the larger stage. So I feel excited that I can contribute to that. And when I see other women working in textiles, I just have draw to that. Like, I feel like we're on the same team, which
Yeah.
is a nice feeling. Like, what's the expression? Like a rising tide lifts all boats. I just really believe in that,
Mm-hmm.
for all artists. But I guess there's something about textile artists where we speak that same language, and it feels
Oh
like,
yeah.
the internet has actually been a great opportunity for me to meet so many other textile artists. I actually have a friend who's based in Transylvania in Romania,
Mm-hmm.
who I met on Instagram years ago, and we were following each other and liking each other's posts. I actually didn't even know her gender or anything. I just, because she had a name on Instagram that didn't give me a clue. And then I was traveling in Bulgaria for a project right across the border, and I just wrote her like, "Hey, can I come? I know this is crazy, but can I come visit you?"
Yeah.
And I did, and she lives in this really small town in the middle of Romania and Transylvania, and we just have so much more in common than we don't.
Mm.
And it was a really great experience for me to understand like how powerful textile can be in
Yeah.
that sense, and it really helps define what it means to be human. Um, and her handle is Craft Made with a K, Craft
Mm.
Made. And
Okay.
she makes really beautiful work. And her work is also very political. And she's thinking about the way that we use materials and we use our hands. So I don't know if that answers the question,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I kind of, assumed some of that, but wanted to hear how your feelings on it. Because yeah, I'm always curious. I have friends who are ceramicists, and it's kind of a similar discussion, I think, like whether they choose to identify as a ceramicist or a potter, or, like where they feel like they fall in this conversation of art and craft. But I think some of my favorite artists are those who sort of blur that line a little bit. So, yeah.
yeah, and it's interesting, especially in the last like maybe 10 years, to see craft really popping up in these art spaces in ways that it
Hmm.
didn't before. Like you go to Armory or Frieze or one of these big fairs, and in the last few years, there's so much textile and ceramic.
Yeah.
And in some cases, it's people that have been working that way for a long time and are getting attention for it now. And in other cases, it's people who've never used those materials and are maybe experimenting with it in a new way now, or they're
Hmm.
like working with fabricators.
Yeah.
And I think it plays an interesting role in that part of it too. I don't think it's a trend. I think it is something that will stick with us. Uh,
Yeah. I think it's ebbs
I
and
lost you.
flows, like interest in it a little bit. Um, are you there?
Yes,
Okay. Great. Um, yeah, I maybe like relative to other things going on at that particular time, like I don't know. For example, I feel like there's so much back and forth between sculpture and design and architecture, and yeah, it's just interesting to see all the kind of crosstalk based on what might be happening in one realm or another.
Yeah, I'll be very curious to see where the art world goes
Hmm.
in this way. It feels to me, I'm certainly not an expert in the industry or business side of the art world, but it seems to me like we'll move even more towards that side of it, like the experiential or like the more human side. But
I think so too. I mean, it's been interesting reading, just to sort of touch a little bit on what's happening right now. Like, there's a lot of like doom and gloom speculation for the art world, but I think in some ways it could be a really interesting and frankly, I think positive shift that could come out of this as a result. So I don't know. I'm also going to be very curious to see what happens.
yeah, yeah. Um, okay, my next question. If you weren't working as an artist, what kind of work do you think you would probably be doing? And then I guess as like a side half question is, do other kind of work to sort of supplement your artistic practice? And what is it like for you to manage that? Those are two different questions, but just thinking about kind of art
Yeah,
as work.
sure. If I weren't an artist, well, When I was a kid, you know, and they make you fill out those things, it's like, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah.
I somehow thought that I would be an astronaut who was also an artist, and clearly that was not in the cards for me. I'm like terrible at math and science, but I do, I love science. And I don't know, I could see maybe something with animals. I'm not sure what exactly, maybe like small scale farming. That's something that was, you know, people in my family, as recently as my grandparents had animals and horses and donkeys and stuff. So it's not that far fetched, but man, I don't really know. I think I would miss the city, but this hypothetical me might not. So
Hmm.
yeah. Um, as far as job, um, I work part-time for an artist as a studio assistant. And that's something I've kind of done on and off ever since I've lived in New York. Where I lived prior, there just at that time were not really opportunities to do that in Kansas City. I think it's very different now, but I haven't been there in like over 11 years, so I have no idea. Um, but yeah, it's pretty great as far as a job is concerned, um, especially if you work for someone who's understanding of the fact that you are also trying to do this thing, you know, and like we don't, you know, as artists, we don't keep 9 to 5 schedules of our own. Some people do, but it's like even if you do, the work itself is never really done. So yeah, I feel really lucky to work for someone who is understanding of that and that things come up and things change and yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Beyond, oh, go ahead.
Sorry, you finish.
Oh no, I was just gonna say like beyond that, I've done like almost every other kind of job you can think of before moving to New York. So yeah,
Yeah, I think as artists, especially in a place like New York, which is so hard to survive in, it feels
oh yeah,
impossible to not be doing something else.
yeah, and like everyone has their like side hustles, like
Mhm,
maybe three, whatever. You know, we all have other things that we're doing, but
mhm.
yeah. But I think, yeah, I think as artists, we're all, you know, a lot of us, not everyone, but I think a lot of us are already kind of on the margins in a way, um, to some extent. So I think it's kind of inborn in us that we're really resourceful and resilient, even in times like this. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, certainly. I wonder what your art would look like if you were making it in space.
Okay, I'm gonna change dream show location to
Yeah,
just
International
just
Space Station.
space.
Yeah, I don't think
Yeah.
that's like totally out of the realm of possibilities for our lifetimes.
Yeah, I could totally see that some weird residency on like
Mhm.
the space station or something. Um,
It's totally in the future. Like
you
the
can't send
first,
an artist would like cause so many problems though, because we'd just be asking like questions about everything. So
you're trying to repurpose everything.
yeah, yeah, we wouldn't listen to anyone.
There are projects I know, like there's this artist named Annie Liu who sent something up to space,
Mm,
and I think maybe there are others who've done something similar, like with a delivery to the International Space Station. So maybe we could start there
yeah,
while you're doing your astronaut training on the side.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm not gonna not think about it. I'll put it that way.
Cool. Are those all our
Yeah,
questions? I think.
I think yeah, those are all the ones I had for you.
And it's been nearly an hour, so I guess
Wow. Okay.
yeah, right. It's 3:53. Yeah. Yeah, it was so nice to chat with you. I'm really looking forward even more than I was to showing our work together.
Yeah, same. And through this conversation, like I already felt a kind of kinship to the way that you work just looking at it. But yeah, I think that we think similarly as well in the studio. So yeah, I'm super excited.
We'll
Um,
do an in-person studio visit when it's safe to do that.
yeah, hopefully sooner rather than later, but
Yeah,
we'll
I
see.
hope so too.
Yeah,
Okay, so I guess that means we say goodbye to, I don't know who was listening, but thank you all for listening.
yeah,
It's been
thanks
a
so
pleasure.
much.
Yeah.
And thank you, Tessa and Eliana, for inviting both of us to show our work at 125 Maiden Lane.
Yes, yes. Stay tuned for details about the show there, opening soon. Okay.
Awesome.
Talk to you
Bye.
soon, Amanda. Bye.
Bye.